2020 was a huge year for video games, and a lot of stuff just came right out of nowhere. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 biggest surprise hits of 2020. Starting off at number 10, it is Valorant. Now this was a game that you looked at it and you were like, I guess it's a ripoff of Overwatch? Not true at all though. This is one hell of a competitive shooter. You know, it is team-based and hero-based like Overwatch. However, the game itself is far more along the lines of Counter-Strike. So the object of the game is when you're on offense, you're going into the enemy's territory to plant a spike, which is a bomb, and when you're on defense, you're trying to stop the other team from doing so. You do have a slew of Overwatch-style powers, and there are a lot of different playstyles that are possible within this game. I played the hell out of Valorant all summer, and just talking about it right now is making me itch to play it again. It does not require a beefy system to play well, and it is extremely enjoyable and entirely free. No reason not to play it. At number 9 is Teardown, which is a game that I've actually talked about on the channel before, though in a much earlier form. Teardown is this incredible voxel constructed, fully destructible, incredibly interactive world in which you destroy buildings, you use vehicles, weapons, bombs, hammers, just anything, and you break the hell out of everything. Now, the actual official reason you do this is to plan a heist, but most of the time when I fire this thing up, I'm literally just like beating stuff down. It is literally just an amazing piece of technology. Everything is fully destructible, and so much of the game actually works. It's interactive. Like you see a boat, jump in it and use it to sail away, I guess. You see a car, you can drive it. You see a bulldozer, you can ram it into a building, and you should, because it's fun. Now the game's still in early access, so they're still adding stuff to it, but at its current state, I would say it's just one of the coolest things ever created. And a single person made it, a guy, a man named Dennis. Excellent work, Dennis. Number 8 is Ghostrunner, which I want to point at as a combination of several other games. Aesthetically, it's less obvious, but as far as gameplay goes, it is super obvious this game is massively influenced by Mirror's Edge, but the combat in it is far more along the lines of, say, Dishonored, when you're not playing stealth. Toss in a little bit of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, obviously still from a first-person perspective, and you have this just beyond slick cybernetic ninja simulator, basically. And you know what? This game basically just came out of nowhere. I hadn't even heard of it, and suddenly it had a demo on Steam. I downloaded the demo from looking at the trailer, which effectively demonstrated it is a very violent Mirror's Edge style game. And I just very quickly became entranced with this one, as did many other people. This is a huge game. For the Steam Awards, it's nominated for Best Game You Suck At, which is probably best translated as a difficult game that is still super fun. And I would say it has earned that nomination. At number 7 is Hades from Supergiant Games. Now this is a developer I've followed for a really long time. They came out with Bastion way back in the day, which is kind of an isometric, story-based, kinda Zelda-ish game, kinda Diablo-style game, somewhere in between those two things, I want to say. The way they did it, though, is with a narrator that was interactive to your style of play, and the thing that they've always tried to do is develop on storytelling. Their previous game, Pyre, experimented with procedural storytelling, but it wasn't a huge hit, and people really didn't bother with the procedural nature of it. They kind of just beat the game and then went on their way. In response, they decided to try out a different approach by making their brand of game as a roguelike. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Pyre was kind of a pretty big departure for Supergiant Games, and while obviously lessons were learned from it in terms of procedural storytelling, this is much more of a return to form for them, and wow, is it the best version of their combat so far. Really the best version of their game so far. They continue to improve their formula, and in all honesty, I kind of expected them to stop a couple of games ago, but they've kept on going, and they have a massive hit in Hades, which is pretty interesting regarding, like, for instance, what happens when you die in a game. You end up facing off against your father, who is Hades. It's also aesthetically probably their best. I don't know, it's just really, like, if you like Supergiant Games, or if you like action RPGs, again, somewhere between old school Zelda and Diablo, this is where you should have went in 2020. At number 6 is Immortals: Phoenix Rising, which is a game that I pretty much think absolutely demolishes its own expectations. when you see it, you're like, oh, well, they made a Zelda game. They saw Breath of the Wild and they made it. And I don't know, like maybe that could be good, but it's not just like a Breath of the Wild clone. This was made by the people who made Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and it really shows a lot of the role-playing elements they've incorporated there come in here, specifically skill tree oriented stuff, but also it's actually a unique world that, although visually resembles Breath of the Wild a bit, certainly enough to get your attention, does enough to justify itself as a genre game rather than a clone. The big surprise here was just that it's as good as it is. It looks very much like a Breath of the Wild ripoff, and it's fantastic. At number 5 is Phasmophobia, a 4-player co-op ghost hunting game. Now, it appropriately labels itself as psychological horror. This is a game that's gonna freak you out. And I don't care if you're playing it on VR, if you're playing it regular, that's what's gonna happen. It's gonna freak you out. It's one of those games just nobody heard of, and it came out and it's fantastic. Now, this is kind of a janky game, but not to the point where it's not fun. In fact, I would even say some of the fun is from the jank. Like, when you start doing the voice recognition stuff and you do what you can to confuse it, it can be kind of funny. But even so, when the voice recognition stuff does what it's supposed to do, it is really fantastic. Now, you don't catch the ghost, you just identify the ghost and move on, but it can also kill you. So, I mean, yeah. Probably the coolest thing is actually communicating with ghosts, even if it's not perfect. Again, nothing in this game is really perfect. It's just well done enough and also charming in its own way. Basically, if you ever watched one of those ghost hunting TV shows, and whether you believed it or not, you thought it'd make a good video game, the answer is yes, it does. At number 4 is Noita, which is just this absolutely incredibly fun roguelike spell crafting / physics based thing that when you were a kid, if you saw, you would have been like, holy crap, why is this not mine? In truth, this is one of those games that's just like, it doesn't actually require any setup at all. I do not care about the story in any ways. The way this game works is all I need. It is purely gameplay that makes this game amazing. It's basically a magic physics-based sandbox, except it's also a roguelike. Like, this is just genuinely an amazing game. It goes so far in what it wants to do and just goes way above and beyond. I've wasted so much time just playing around with magic crafting in this game. Every single pixel is simulated. You can do something to every single pixel, and it's just, it's so fun. At number 3 is Fall Guys, which is a game that is basically just Takashi's Castle as a game. Yes, that is exactly what I needed to know to get me in. But if you need a little bit more explanation, it's essentially an obstacle course game in which you're playing against a bunch of other people. You have to get to the end of the obstacle course as other people are also trying to do so. You can kind of sabotage other people, but not to a huge extent. And yeah, it can be kind of hard, but once you get good at it, it's also just a really interesting game because as much as it seems like there's not a lot to it, it can go a lot of different ways. And interestingly enough, getting frustrated with it only lasts like a second or so because the next thing happens so quickly. Even losing doesn't necessarily piss me off. I can get into another game really quick, and it's incredibly fun. It did get a little bit overtaken by Among Us, but I mean, you can still get on, play Fall Guys. There's a ton of people playing it. It's still great. At number 2 is Mortal Shell, which, let's just go ahead and say this was one of those games where like an indie developer is making a Dark Souls, like, oh, congrats. We've never seen that before, but you know, whatever. Obviously, we don't know the dev, we don't know the track record, etc., etc. But Mortal Shell is killer, to say the very least. Now, the cool thing about it is they basically saved themselves a ton of development stuff by making the gameplay mechanic that basically makes the game. The whole idea of the Mortal Shell is that you can possess different bodies and that has different attributes, and that's how you develop your character. It cut down all the work of creating extensive customization options, and interestingly enough, I think makes the game what it is. There's also a number of differences in combat, minor ones, not major ones, but enough that it is definitely its own game. And it's also beautiful. Like, in terms of Souls-like games, it's one of the better looking ones. Although it's a little short, I'm pretty okay with the length. And when it's at full price, it's only at $29. You can get it discounted right now for $20.99. It's phenomenal. It is one I very much hope becomes a series. And finally, at number 1, it is Black Mesa, which is a remake of the first Half-Life game, something that sorely needed to happen. It uses an updated version of the source engine. It reimagines a lot of things that are, quite frankly, extremely rudimentary in the original game, and gives you basically the definitive experience in terms of the Black Mesa incident. So many outlets praised this. Not just that it's a faithful remake with changes that are actually quite tasteful, but it basically reworks the entire last bit of the game, the Zen chapters, and it's so much better. It's just so much better. This was one we weren't ever really sure was going to come out. We'd seen little bits of it through the years, but it hit this year and it hit hard. Couple of bonus games for you. We have to mention Among Us. It's not a game that came out this year, but it is a game that became a hit this year, so it's probably good to bring it up. I don't know if I really have to explain it, but your crew members on a ship, you have to complete tasks. There's an imposter who's able to kill. You're supposed to identify the imposter and eject him from the ship before they kill the crew. Hell of a party game, tons of fun to play, even if everybody's in the same room, especially if everybody's in the same room. Next is Until You Fall, which is a VR sword fighting game, and in terms of what you might expect, it actually delivers rather than being a VR disappointment. And then there's finally Visage, a first-person horror game, which really goes out of its way to have incredibly realistic environments. In all honesty, it is a genuinely beautiful game. It's clearly a game that was inspired by PT a bit. However, its visual style is very different, and the actual object of what's going on is as well. Basically, you're trying to stay sane as you're wandering through a house where tons of awful stuff has happened, and the ghosts of that stuff are hanging around. Really, this is just a phenomenal game. Did you play any of these games this year? My guess is yes, but leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe. Do not forget to click the notification bell. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at FalconHero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.